Okay, good evening and welcome to Me in the Bible. We are up to class number Esau, Eisav. Again, I'm going to probably be switching between the two, Eisav and Esau, throughout the night. So don't get confused, it's the same person. Who is Eisav? So let's just put that into perspective very quickly. Jacob had a twin brother, actually born a few seconds older before him, making him older, and that was Esau, Eisav. This was the son of Jacob, of Rebecca, Rivka, and Yitzchak, Isaac. So that's who we're dealing with tonight. Although we did already talk about Leah last week, we're going back to Esau, Eisav, which is the same generation. In fact, this was the man who she was destined to marry before her prayers. And I got great feedback from last week's class regarding the idea of resilience and never giving up hope and the prayer that Leah represented. So thank you for that feedback. And if you have any further questions on tonight's class or any subsequent ideas, please share them with me. I really enjoy hearing them. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that if we've had a close-ish look at the Torah, we assume evil and negativity with Esau. When we think about Esau, we think about the bad brother. And in fact, as we sift through the verses, as we always do, to pick out the little parts of his life that the Torah tells us about, then we recognize that Esau seems to be this bad son, evil, wicked. Now, here's what's important. As we go through these classes of Me in the Bible, I want to continuously identify struggles that we have, personal struggles we have. Now, when the individual, the character, he or she is a good one, then we'll emulate that and we'll copy that. But I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that we're going to find a positive quality in Eisav. Eisav was rotten. He was evil through and through, as we'll see. But there's still what to be learned from his struggle of what not to do, how to do things differently. And I believe that tonight's class touches on a fundamental idea, and that is, what is my destiny and is it predetermined? And why does this question come up so many times, specifically with Esau? It really begins with the story of his birth, or prior to his birth. It says in the verse that Rebecca had a very difficult pregnancy. And she really didn't understand her pregnancy. She didn't know what was going on. Now, you might think if she has a problem with her pregnancy, she should go see a doctor, but she doesn't. She runs to a priest of God, a righteous individual whose name was Shem, the son of Noah, and she asks him, she says, I don't know what's going on here. Please help me out. Now, the question is, if this was a medical challenge or a symptom that she was experiencing, then of course a doctor is the better choice. So why is she in fact going to a tzaddik, a righteous leader, a prophet, a scholar? And the answer is because she had a very unique type of symptom. And this was what she described. She says, I'm very confused about what's happening inside of me, she says. Every time I walk past a holy place, a place of Torah, I feel like the baby is jumping out. Now, she doesn't know that she's having twins, okay? So she just has this symptom. It feels like the baby's jumping out. And then when I walk past a house of idolatry where they serve idols and foreign gods, and they don't believe in the one God that I believe in, I feel like the baby's jumping out. So I'm very confused. What type of a child? Is bipolar, schizophrenic, all of these different issues that the child may have in her mind. And she is told that, you know what's going on inside of your womb? You have two children, and each one represents a different path in life. One is, we don't know the names yet, is going to be Jacob, and he represents a path of godliness. The other one is Esau. He represents a path of wickedness. He's a rasha, he's wicked. And this is why Esau begs the question, are our life's journeys predetermined? Is my destiny already made? Because this begs the question, was Eisav born to be a rasha? Was he born to be wicked? Here he is trying to serve idols from where? From the womb. This was not something he decided. He didn't have a choice in the womb. This was clearly the way he was created. So it almost sounds like his path in life has already been determined, scripted, planned for evil before his very birth. And that is why the life of Esau begs this question so often. And we say, what do you want from the guy? He just lived up to the way Rebecca was told he would be. And the greater question there is, what about each one of us? Are we also predetermined from the womb, from before birth? Which means that maybe my struggles and my attempts to do better in life are actually in vain, because I'm just going to default back to the way I'm supposed to be. And that is why Esau is such a fundamental character to study and understand. Before we answer that question, and before we look further in that direction, let's take a step back and look at his life. What was his life like? Did he indeed live up to this evil name? And of course he did. So number one, we don't know much about his earlier years. We know about the story in the womb. We don't know much else. The next time we hear about them is at their bar mitzvah, these twins. Bar mitzvah for Jacob, for Yaakov, bar mitzvah for Esau. He is also becoming bar mitzvah. And the question is, what did they do? How did they celebrate? What was this monumental celebration of their bar mitzvah, the twins? So it says they grew up, and Jacob turned to the tent where he studied and he prayed and he followed a devout lifestyle. And Esau says was the man of the field. The Medrash, the rabbis, go into great detail as how Esau celebrated his bar mitzvah. To put it simple, without getting into all the detail, he did it through murder, through rape, and through theft. That is what he went out to do on the day of his bar mitzvah, to mark his adulthood, and that is where he went. And then we know he comes back from the field and he's exhausted. And this is where we have the scene with the birthright. And if I'm saying anything too fast, please stop me. I'm just trying to go through it without taking too much time, but I want to get through the details. So he comes back from the field this day and he's exhausted, and he sees his brother cooking a soup, a lentil soup. Now, we are taught that this day was the day that Abraham passed away, which means Abraham never saw Eisav acting in this wicked, horrible, evil way. He never saw it. It was that very day of his passing that Eisav started his evil path. And he comes in exhausted, and he turns to his brother Jacob and he says, I want that soup. I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. Been a busy day. And Jacob says, whoa, whoa, whoa. This soup is actually for father, for Isaac. I was making him a dish. It's a mourner's dish, lentils, and I want him to have it. But I'm happy to sell it to you. But in exchange, I want something. He says, what do you want? He says, well, I want the birthright. Meaning, I'm not born first, Jacob says. You were born first. But I would like the honor, the merit, and all of the blessings that are associated with being born first. That's for me. And he says, yeah, I don't mind. You can have the birthright. And with that, he was actually saying something a little bit deeper. He was saying to Jacob, you're like this type of kid, this goody-good, this abstract kid who likes to learn and study. I'm practical. I want to enjoy my life. I want to live up every second that I can. So you know what? I'll get the pleasures of this world, and you can get all the pleasures of the next world, of the world to come. In short, he was denying the existence of what we say in Hebrew, Olam Haba, the next world. He denied that the idea of a soul continuing its journey further than this world. And he said, I just want to enjoy myself. So that soup represented his statement that I care only about my life here on earth. Okay? Now, there's another thing that he does at his birth, and I should have mentioned this earlier, and that is that he did not like this idea of having more siblings. Now, this is going to sound strange. What exactly it means, I'm not sure. But this is what it says. It says that on his way out, of his mother's womb, he tore the womb, causing Rebekah irreversible damage that she could never bear more kids. He didn't want it. He didn't want there to be anyone else. He wanted to be the only one in existence, and he wanted to be the one to get all of the blessings. And that's why he wanted to kill his brother Jacob as well. Now, he felt like I should wait for it a bit later, and he didn't want to kill his brother during his father's lifetime, but he still wanted to kill Jacob. In fact, he had this tradition that Cain, the son of Adam, killed Hevel. He knew this, but he always said that was very silly of Cain to do that. He should have waited till Adam died and then killed his brother, and then Adam couldn't have any more kids. Again, he was very much focused on being the only one, the only heir. He didn't like this idea of sharing the blessings, sharing the inheritance. He wanted it all very much for himself. Okay. Now, he was so upset. Let's keep going through his life. He was so upset at what Jacob did in taking the blessings, which was to hit in his mind a calamity, the worst thing that could happen. Remember, this is how he had set up his life, tearing his mother's womb. He really wants these blessings, and now Jacob sneaks in and gets those blessings. So he wants to kill his brother. He really wants to kill him, but again, he wants to wait till Isaac passes away. And he goes out and chases him, and we're told he chased him for a lengthy amount of time. In fact, there's many miracles that God did to save Jacob. God made it dark, couldn't see where he was going, so on and so forth. So he continued this evil path of hunting down his own brother, not caring about his own family. Eventually, Jacob, after spending 22 years away from home, wants to go back to the land of Israel to see if things are better, and Esau's out there with an army ready to kill him as well. That is almost the last part that we know of in the Torah about Eisav, about Esau. There's one final part that we have, and this is an interesting scene that takes place at the funeral of Jacob. Now, where was Jacob buried? He was buried in what we know today is Ma'aras HaMachpelah, in the city, the holy city of Hebron. That is the cave that Abraham purchased to bury his wife Sarah. Eventually, he was buried there. Isaac was buried there. Rebekah was buried there. And there was two more spots. Jacob was going to take that spot next to Leah. However, right at that funeral, Esau shows up. And he starts making a commotion. And he says, hey, whoa, not so fast. Why is Jacob getting that spot? I'm older. I want to be buried in that holy cave. It's not for him, it's for me. I'm taking that spot. And there was a big commotion. And the tribes, Jacob's sons, of course, were not very happy about this. And they start arguing. And there was a big commotion. Now, Jacob's grandson was deaf. He couldn't hear. All he could see was that his wicked uncle Eisav was preventing and holding up the burial. And he was very upset about that. So it says he took his stick and he swung it at Eisav. And the head of Eisav rolled into the cave and landed on the lap of Isaac. And so Esau's head is buried in the cave, and his body was buried elsewhere in an orchard nearby. That is really what we have about the life of Esau, a wicked one. It's evil through and through. He lives up to the expectation of being wicked, following worldly pleasures, following idol. If we think about the big three, cardinal sins of Judaism, idolatry, adultery, and murder, he lives up to all of those constantly, day in and day out. Okay, so we have to go back to our question and say, great, so very nice. Esau was put into this world to be evil, and he accomplished that. Great. But is that really true? Is it really true that he was born with that destiny and he had no way around it? And and everyone else was just victims in God's plan of his life? Does that really encourage us when we're challenged and we're struggling with a behavior, a habit, a tendency, an aspect of our own life that might not be so pure at this point? Of course not. So where can we find the answer? And for that, we need to dig a little bit deeper, not just read the verses in their surface view, in a shallow reading, but we have to take that one step further and try to find clues and hints and pieces of the puzzle that can answer this big, big question of our destiny. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts that they want to jump in with at this point? Okay.
No questions for me.
No questions. Great. Okay. All right, we'll move on. If you do have a question, well, again, I'll stop at the end. But now let's go towards the deeper element of Esav's life. When Eisav is born, it describes him, and he was unusual. It says he was full of hair, not your typical newborn. And it says he was born red. He was born red. And we know that this color of redness that he had represents the wicked way of life, the bloodshed that he would cause, the indulgent way of those lentils, the way he ate them. And that's the way he was born. So he was born red, representing the evil nature that he would later show very clearly. But yet, although he was born red, we look very carefully, he's not called by the name red, which is Edom. He's not Adomi until later on. His name is Eisav. That's the name his parents gave him, and that's the only name that we have for him until later on. When do we suddenly see that the verse says, now this is why he's called Edomi, the red one, representing his evil, his murder, his gluttonous ways? When he does that. The moment he demands from Jacob the soup, and Jacob pours it down his throat, the Torah says those red lentils, that red porridge or stew, whatever exactly it was, now, because of that behavior, he is called Edom, the red one. And that unlocks the key to understanding Esav's life. Think about that for a minute. He was born with the struggle with a tendency to lean towards bloodshed, to lean towards being power hungry, towards being indulgent of physical things. But the Torah never labels him as that until he makes those choices and his actions go ahead and confirm it. Which means that your struggles don't make you evil. Your challenges don't make you a bad person. If I am naturally jealous, that does not mean I am evil. If I am naturally angry, that doesn't make me evil. If you're naturally lazy, it doesn't make you evil. It simply says, you know what your destiny is? To struggle with jealousy, anger, laziness, apathy, whatever it is. And guess what? Your path to greatness is through overcoming that very challenge. Your path to greatness is through taking that struggle head on. We touched on this last week, but Eisav, what I'm about to say, we touched on last week, but I want to reiterate it because Eisav really defines this. And that is, again, Isaac says, make for me tasty foods. And we spoke about how it was plural. There's two types of delicacies in this world. There's the type that's sweet, like candy, and then there's the one that's spicy. And Maimonides, so let's expound on that a little bit more. What does it mean? And I'm just touching on, we spoke about this at length last week, because remember, Leah was supposed to marry Esau, so she understood these two elements of a struggle and she overcame it. So sweet food is naturally sweet. You see it, it tastes good. A spicy food is a transformational process where you took something that's not good on its own, doesn't taste great by itself, and you turn it into a tasty dish. And this is what Maimonides says, There's two types of individuals. We can classify and characterize people in this world with two types of personalities. One is the goody good, so to speak, and one is the one who has to struggle and consistently fight for their path to greatness. And they're both equally good. That's the important point. Destiny is our choices in these struggles. God says, connect to me. Live a life full of holiness and divinity. And there are two paths to reach that. Some are blessed with a path. It's straight. It's smooth. The navigation is clear. The weather is great. It's scenic. It's a great path. They don't crave evil. They're not tempted after gluttonous things. They are simply down the road of a smooth ride. But some are given a path of divine service that demands, that requires a tremendous struggle. And this is exactly the path that this individual needs to discover God. So when we ask ourselves, is my destiny, can I change my destiny? We have to think about that question in a new way. Am I asking myself, do I have to define myself by my struggle and say, I'm done, this is who I am? Or can I say, my destiny is to struggle with this and overcome and win? Because if we identify ourselves by the struggle that we have to make, then we give up and say, what do you want from me? Esau in the womb wasn't evil. He didn't do anything wrong. It was opening Rebecca's eyes to the idea that this child of yours has tendencies towards idol worship and evil. And that's going to be his struggle. And in order to get nachas from this type of child, you're going to have to identify and appreciate the small victories, the moments of struggle, and how he or she overcomes them. That's how you're going to have nachas from these types of children. And you have to make peace with that. Here's another powerful point that we have to always keep in mind. And that is how we relate this to others as well. And what is the proof that Esau did have a choice in his life? And he didn't have to be this evil man that he ended up being, is that the people around him, all the people in his life, never for a moment gave up on him. Never did they say, this is who you are. This is who you are going to be. They never, ever, for one moment, gave up on him. And that was a very powerful idea. Where do we see that? We see that all the way from the beginning. Let's start with Isaac, his father. Isaac said, I love you. I want to bless you. Why? He knew he wasn't naive. He was blind physically, but he certainly wasn't naive. And he certainly wasn't in denial. He saw the potential in Esau. He recognized the power of his soul. And if he could tap into that wild, creative nature of his, he can transform that into something better. So he says, I'll bless you. Maybe that will give you the boost to overcome your struggle. So he wants to bless him. Never gave up on him. Rebecca, his mother, never gives up on him. His mother loved him, cared for him. He trusted his mother. And she was hoping for that moment. Yes, she didn't want him to get the blessings. She recognized that he wasn't the right one. But yet she never gave up on him. His own brother Jacob, who had to flee for his life because of his brother Eisav, also never gave up on him. He ran away. And for 22 years or so, they were separated. Jacob went on his path, continued growing in his connection to God, his service of God, his study of Torah. He didn't know what happened to Esau. And at the end of those years, when he has a family now and he wants to join once again with Esau, come back to the land of Israel, he sends out a messenger. And he says, find out where Esau is holding. And what he wants to do is he wants to know, does has Esau done repentance? Has he come around? And the answer is unfortunately not. And that, nevertheless, doesn't take away from Jacob's honest feeling that, you know what, maybe, just maybe he did turn around after all these years. Please go find out. I've grown. Has he grown in his observance? Has he grown in his connection to God? And they come back and they say, no, he's still your brother and he still hates you. But guess what? It doesn't end there. In his physical lifetime, things didn't turn around. But the potential for greatness to come from Esau never went away. And that is why we have a tradition that some of the most famous Jews, some of the greatest scholars in our history were born as Romans, the direct descendants of Esau, converted to become Jewish, and accomplished great things. I'll give you two examples. One is an individual named Onkelos. Onkelos was the nephew of the Roman emperor, and at the risk of his own life, he converts to Judaism. And he goes ahead and he becomes the translator of the Torah into Aramaic. And it's not just a translation, it's also a beautiful explanation as well. And that is studied till today. Another pair of converts from Eisav is two great sages named Shmaya and Avtalion, who were the leaders of their times, and they were the teachers of two famous scholars named Shammai and Hillel. You may have heard of them. We're not going to get into that now. Two very famous scholars who laid down the law in many, many cases. So what does that tell us? That tells us that in every relationship that we have, starting with ourselves, we have a choice to make. We can label ourselves with all types of negative labels and names and say, this is who I am. And the more we repeat that to ourselves, the more we will live up to that expectation. Many times we see this with education of children. If we tell a child that you're lazy, they will do their very best to live up to that expectation of being lazy. They will start defining themselves as lazy, and they will live their life under that guise of I'm lazy. When all it is was the struggle was laziness. That's not who the child is. And we continue that idea. If we want to be honest with ourselves and say, this is who I am, then we have to say, I am someone with a struggle. How will I overcome it? If we want to be honest about people in our lives and say, they are mean, they are rude, they cut me out, they isolated me, then we've shut the door to any transformation. If we recognize their wrongdoing, their action as a challenge, then we've kept the door open for success going further. And this is the way the Rabbi wanted us to think. He trained us as a generation how to come out with this idea. And it was the most visible during the hippie generation. The hippies were all over the place. Everyone was struggling what to do with these people, crazy people, long hair, funny ideas, all sorts of things. And nobody knew what to do. Just sit down, get your degrees, go to college, go to work, raise a family, stop demonstrating. Nobody knew. Try to squash them, try to crush this energy. And the Rebbe saw this as a powerful generation. And he said this publicly and privately. He said, look at them. They have energy. They just don't know where to channel it. And we have the ability, he said, to channel that energy in the right places for positive things. And if they would be labeled, as many of them were, as bad, as irresponsible, as out of touch with reality, not helping society, then it's true. Then it's absolutely true. That's what they'll be. And we have a choice to make. How do we view ourselves? How do we view others? We could say that's who they are, or we could say that's the struggle that's the struggle that will help them become who they are. And is a very big difference between how we approach a challenge. And I once heard from the person himself a very powerful story. And it's not about a hero. It's not about someone who later became famous. It's about regular people, because I think that's the power. There was a school in a neighborhood that was not very, it wasn't a great neighborhood. It was sort of in the dumps. Kids did not come from healthy homes. Kids were coming with all types of trauma and challenges. And public school, in a certain sense, was the best place in their life. Home was not a healthy, safe place. And these kids, some of them did better, some of them did worse. But there was a particular grade, 5th grade class, where there was one child whose home was a real mess. And he would come to school and he would try to get a little bit of love there, a little bit of connection, try to form him as a good person. But unfortunately, every year, at the beginning of the year, he would start acting up. The teachers would get frustrated and they would send him out. They would isolate him. They would ridicule him. And he continued down his path. As he entered 5th grade, his new teacher, and I forget her name, his new teacher got the class list. And she was warned, oh, that child, you're going to see how quickly he can take the power of the classroom out of your hands into his. He's going to start cracking jokes. He's going to start throwing wise cracks, and you're going to see how quickly it's going to be over. And she said, do my best. So she walked into class on the first day, and she was very nervous. And she looks around and she sees the boys and girls in her classroom. And right away, the name and the child of this boy, who is the terror of the school, is sitting in front. And she introduces herself. And right then he opens his mouth and cracks a hilarious joke about her name. And the whole class erupts in laughter. And she says that moment she had a choice to make. Right then I can slap the label on him. Bad, rude, outcast, get him out of here. But that hasn't worked. And she took a deep breath, she says, and she turns to this boy and she says, you know, you have a wonderful sense of humor. I can't wait to see all the great things you will add to our class this year with your sense of humor. And the change wasn't instant, but the connection was made. And instead of being labeled this child who is terrible, he realized that there was someone who actually cared about him and saw him for who he was, for who he is. And he goes on to say, and he's hilarious. He has a great sense of humor. So when he says the story, you're laughing. And he goes on. And as I said, he didn't become a president. He didn't become a scientist. He became a regular member of society, a person with a family, a job, a stable job, where he could have ended up who knows where else had that trajectory of his life continued. And that is how we have to look at ourselves and how we have to look at everyone in our life. If I want to label them and keep them frozen in that image, I can. But I could do better. And I can't blame it on destiny. I could say that struggle is not who you are. That struggle will make you who you need to be. And that is what Eisav teaches us. Eisav reminds us that despite my natural tendencies, I have a choice to make. I can never just blame it on the fact that I feel this, I want this, I'm tempted to this. No, Eisav reminds us that we have a choice at every moment of our lives. And ultimately, we should never write anybody off. Just like Eisav, nobody written him off because he ultimately had potential and positivity that he had to bring to the table. It didn't happen in his lifetime because he didn't tap into that, but it happened many generations later. His direct descendants became the good people that he could have become, but yet he allowed his struggle to define him. And each one of us can stop for a moment and take a true reckoning, a true self accounting, and say to myself, am I blaming this challenge on destiny? This is it. Put my hands up in defeat. Or am I ready to take it head on And through that, I can become the person that I know I can be and really contribute to myself, to the world, to my community, and to my family. And that's what Eisav reminds us. When he's in the womb, his struggle is defined. When he drinks the lentils, he becomes that Adomi, that red one, where he starts defining himself. But remember, everybody around him never gave up hope, because who are we to write anybody off? We don't know anyone's struggle. We just have to be there to help them, to help ourselves. Any questions, any thoughts that you want to add or share?